For 3 days Rodney followed the French fleet until he was in position in the passage between Dominica and Guadeloupe known as the Saints. He had 36 ships against the French fleet of 33, and the battle was a standard line battle in which ships form a line and fire directly at each other. A fleet captain, Sir Charles Douglas, recommended Rodney break the line after 168 the lodge, and the Revolution the French left a gap in their formation. But this was against the fighting instructions, the British Navy's rules of engagement, and it was a gamble that could result in a court-martial, or even a firing squad if it failed. Rodney was not even sure his captains would follow such an order. Years of gambling, however, inspired Rodney to take such a great bet, and he won. 5 ships followed him, and he circled several French ships to fire upon them from both sides. His other captains also exploited gaps in the French line. Even the Ville de Paris, the world's largest fighting ship, was overtaken, abandoned by its crew, and set on fire by the British. Of course, this had no effect on the outcome of the war in the colonies. It did serve to make Rodney a hero, however, and so his motives would not be challenged after the war. The deal made between the Duc de Biron and the indebted Admiral Rodney worked out very well for both men. Admiral Rodney had his fortune back, and despite abandoning Cornwallis at Yorktown, Rodney was still regarded as a war hero for the naval battle he chose to win. The Duc de Biron's nephew was safe, for the time being, and was now regarded as a hero in the war against England. However, the Duc de Lauzun's status would not save him from the terrors of the French Revolution. He would go to the guillotine, but not before offering his executioner a glass of wine. The deal that allowed Rodney's gambling debt to be repaid also allowed America to win independence. Chapter 9 One nation under the Great Architect. Even though the war ended in February 1783, it would still be almost 10 more months before the peace treaty was signed in Paris. The new nation then turned to winning the peace. From the very beginning of American history it was evident that a handful of Masons would exert a powerful influence both in the open and in secret. The Declaration of Independence was drawn up by the non-Mason Thomas Jefferson. It was first signed by a Mason, John Hancock, and on its first vote on July 1, 1776, the document was approved by 9 of the states, a clear majority. The next day the vote reached 12, with the New York delegation not voting. John Adams had predicted that July 2 would forever be celebrated as the Day of Independence for the American colonies. On the 4th New York voted, and the declaration was signed by the President and the Secretary of Congress, not by Hancock or any of the other 56 signers, which would come later. When the declaration was signed, up to 41 of the signers were Masons, even though not all of these Masons were publicly acknowledged as such. Among Masons, July 4 was held as a sacred day. It marked the rising of Sirius, which in ancient religions was related to the god Thoth, who brought knowledge to man. It was also considered the guardian to the goddess Isis. As such it was the most important star in the sky, and at least 7 major Egyptian temples were oriented to it. The 4th of July was now sacred to the new nation, as well. 170 the Lodge, and the Revolution the Constitution was also drawn up by several influential Masons including Washington, Franklin, and Randolph, and by non-Masons John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. All of them had been influenced by the philosophical movement that swept Europe and included Sir Francis Bacon, Rousseau, and Voltaire. The Founding Fathers, however, had ambiguous feelings toward the secret societies that spread these philosophies. Washington was known never to willingly promote a non-Mason in the military, but John Adams, on the other hand, wrote several anti-Masonic tracts. Adams believed Masonry was one of the greatest moral and political evils, and regarded it as a conspiracy of the few against the many. 2 Jefferson was not a Mason, although his attendance at Masonic meetings has been documented. There is some evidence of his flirtation with Rosicrucianism, including some Rosicrucian codes that were found among his writings. 3 There is stronger evidence that Franklin was connected to the Rosicrucian group that was centered in Germantown, Pennsylvania. And certainly there is no shortage of evidence of Franklin's numerous Masonic affiliations. Of the 40 men who signed the Constitution, many were already Masonic brothers and others would become Masons afterward. Masonic lodges claim that nearly all the signers at least participated in lodge activities, but most historians agree that several were not Masons, including Madison and Jefferson. The Illuminati group was the most secretive, and possibly the most conspiratorial entity in Europe, but members did not make headway in the colonies the way the Masons did. Washington spoke out against that group, condemning them self-created and unrelated to Freemasonry. 4. But Washington could trace his own family's aristocratic roots, and despite his efforts on behalf of a democracy, he was an elitist who would create the Society of the Cincinnati, which admitted only those with aristocratic backgrounds. This elite society caused widespread fear of a new aristocracy, and even fellow Virginian Thomas Jefferson immediately distrusted the institution. Washington later stepped back from the aristocratic leanings of the group. One nation under the great architect. 171 On April 30, 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as president. The oath of office was administered by Robert Livingston, who was the Grand Master of New York's Grand Lodge. The Marshal of the day was another Freemason, General Jacob Morton. Yet another Freemason, General Morgan Lewis, was Washington's escort. Washington, the master of the Alexandria Lodge, took his oath of office on the Bible from St. John's Lodge of New York. 5 The new order of the ages. Soon the nation's new capital was laid out. The location was in a wilderness more suited for hunting grouse than for administering the new country, but it had its advantages. Washington feared that New York would serve as a bad example, and allow the money men like Hamilton to control the country, and he did not want to place the capital there. 6 Jefferson enjoyed the proximity of the new capital to Virginia. The city was blueprinted in a Masonic plan, designed by the French Mason Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, who had volunteered to fight for liberty. He was close to Washington and a member of the Society of the Cincinnati. The ceremony commemorating the laying of the Capitol's cornerstone was strictly a Masonic event. Washington served as master, wearing the apron and sash of his lodge. Members from lodges all over Maryland and Virginia were in attendance, and accordingly dressed in Masonic regalia. The ceremony itself was a Masonic ritual performed with baptism by corn, wine, and oil to signify nourishment and refreshment. Masons were also called on to design, plan, and build university buildings, state houses, bridges, and war memorials, which they then consecrated with their corn, oil, and wine blessing. 7 The Capitol building, and the east-west axis of the new city, were oriented in a complicated way, to correspond with the arc of the sun. The dome of the Capitol is a symbol of the half-arc of the visible heavens. Where the equinoctial and solstitial points meet. The tradition of incorporating arcane geometry and esoteric symbols continues to modern times. In May 1974, Senator Joe Biden of Delaware 172 the Lodge, and the Revolution made an official inquiry into the astrological symbols on the ceiling of the Senate Post Office, and the Civil Service Committee room. And the Great Seal of the United States was designed at the same time. It had been proposed that Franklin, Adams, and Jefferson designed the new seal, but their suggestions of heraldic devices, twin goddesses, and the Illuminati Eye of God in a triangle were rejected. 2 new design committees would be employed before the designs were acceptable to all. The final Great Seal is also full of arcane symbolism. The bald eagle is said to represent Scorpio, who is associated with death and rebirth. The eagle holds a scroll that depicts the 13-letter motto E pluribus unum, meaning one out of many. Some believe this motto represents one nation rising from the 13 colonies, but others believe that it refers to the concept of one God over all gods, a Masonic tenet. The reverse of the seal is a truncated pyramid, a common Masonic symbol. The pyramid has 13 steps, one for each colony. Its face has 72 bricks, representative of another number that is sacred in religious writings, from the Rig Veda to works of the Babylonian Bereshit to the Finnish Kalevala. The pyramid without its cap is said to be the loss of wisdom by humanity, because of the long reign of the church over knowledge. This symbol first appeared on colonial money. The seal also depicts the all-seeing eye, which was a cult symbol that can be traced back to ancient Egypt. Many believe the eye represents the goddess Isis, who is also regarded as a personification of knowledge.